Okay, Chapter 8. Erecting shop. Frames. The erecting shop, all parts of which make the complete locomotive, are assembled and put together. The frame plates, which form the foundation of the engine, are first taken in hand and placed in position on the opposite side of the long pit. The pit is made within the floor of the shop between the rails on which the engine will stand after the wheels have been placed in position. The frames are placed vertically in a natural position, resting the groove made with the head of the screw jacks. By means of these jacks, the frames can be leveled and set with the exact position required. The frame plates are held temporarily at proper distance apart by long bolts and distant pieces until the permanent stays are fastened to them. They are leveled both longitudinally and transversely, means the long straight edges upon the spirit levels are placed. The vertical adjustment is made with the plumb lines. Both frames must be placed exactly opposite to each of the other with the proper relative position. If adjustments are made with the placed straight edges across the faces of the horn blocks and using trammels. A trammel is a long steel rectangular bar which sliding compass points, the latter being set to a definite distance according with the dimensions of the drawing. The trammeling is done diagonally across the frames between the points marked on their top edges immediately above the line representing the centuries of the axis L's, and this shown in figure 41 with the FF present with the two frames of the plan, the A1, A2, A3 centuries, the line axles, dotted line shown. So you have axle A1, A2, A3, diagonal direction for the trammel diagonal squareness for the frames to ensure the distance for the X1 and Y2 for the equal of the distance of X2, Y1, and Y1, Z2 for the equal of the Y2, Z1. At the same time, the longitudinal transverse dimensions must also be checked with the trammel for the XY1, X1, XY1 must be equal to X2, Y2, longitudinal X1 and Y2 equal to Y1, Y2 transversely. Similar to measurements made for the axles A2 and A3. Motion plate F, figure 42 for the cross stave with the G, in front of the firebox, drag box casting with the H are temporarily bolted and placed secure with the frames for together. The bolts are used in being smaller than the holes of the frame so that any of the necessary adjustments can afterwards be slightly moving the parts essential for the engine should be perfectly square, otherwise it will not run freely and endless trouble with extra repairs will result. Fixing the cylinders. Cylinders are then lowered into place by the crane, fastened temporarily in ordinary bolts. The rest applied with the planks placed across the pit, then placed with the jack point. Some of the shops or angle irons temporarily with the frame support with the cylinders is absolutely necessary for the century line. For the cylinder of the ladder are fixed permanently should exactly parallel with the frame to the face of the horn block to determine the alignment of the axles must exactly at right angle to the cylinder century lines. Long steel straight edge A, figure 42 is fastened across the front of the frame, suitable height which made with the measurement of the drawings. Another straight edge B with the fixed across the driving horn block face with the wires representing with the century center lines. Cylinder century lines stretched with the tightened line between the two straight edges with their distance apart from the two frames are being measured from the drawing. The wires will be noticeable pass through the boards with the cylinder in place with the straight edge A, the very usually fastened with the front end of the two wires to steel strips fitted against the front end of each of the cylinder, each strip having the small hole exactly the century of the bore cylinder in which with the wire with the fastened cylinders can be raised lowered on the jacks just slightly with the longitudinal incline direction until they are exact the position according with the drawings. Two measurements are necessary to verify this. The circumference of the bore of each of the cylinder must be at equal distance all around the century wire throughout the full length of the bore. This measurement is tested with the calipers. Finally, the longitudinal distance of the face of the cylinder with the century of the driving axle shown in straight edge B is measured on both sides of the engine rod. Exact length of the required fixed for the longitudinal position of the two cylinders. This shows the Locomotive Publishing Company erection locomotive frame cylinders. You can see the jacks holding up the truck. Alright, two longitudinal wires E are also stretched out E for the frame. They are set with a long square applied with the straight edge B, but they must be applied with the right angle, but they must all be parallel. The wire C representing with the cylinder century line with the straightness for the parallelism frame to test with these lines. Finally, exact position of motion plate F is located with the cylinder line, century line CC, since the slide bars are fixed with the plate with the necessary for the bore cylinder for the piston rod and slide bars to have the same century line. Permanent fixing with the frame attachments. So for the parts have been also bolted temporarily before any of the permanent fixing done with the foreman shop go over the test of the whole work, taking measurement longitudinal, transversely, diagonal, see if the frame is the cylinders cross stay with the perfectly square. They are all dimensions correct in accordance with the drawings. If everything found in order with all all the holes and broach reamered out with the finished side so that the cylinders stay out to be united with the frames. All the holes of both of the parts coincide exactly. All bolts and cold rivets connecting with the parts of the frame that turn with the tight driven fitting into the holes. The cylinders are also bolted with the frame since they may have been removed from the repairs for the future period. The same applied with the horn blocks made, but the motion of the plate with the cold riveted to the plate G is usually hot riveted to the various brackets. There must be known the fastened position amongst the angle brackets placed outside of the frame. Right angles to them, long angle irons riveted to the top of the frame. These angle irons or brackets carry the plates with the platforms along each side of the engine. Occasionally, these platforms are placed above the level of the tops of the wheels, but it's more usual for them to be below this level, in which the case of the rectangular holes made in the which passes the upper portions of these wheels. The holes are covered with the segment casting known as splashers, which cover in the protruding portions of the wheels. Platforms, angle irons, brackets are riveted to the one on by means of the portable hydraulic riveting machine similar to used in the boiler shop. Correcting the motion. The cylinder in the motion being positioned with the slide bars may be known, but the fixed for the purpose of the wire of the figure 42 present with the cylinder century line with the used for the front of the erector of the can be set for the bars and parallel central lines, the equal distance from them and above and below. The bars are bolted with the face projected with the blade back. Cylinders cover the end and one end of the motion plate with on the other. The fine brass liners are placed between the bar of these projection thickness between the adjusted two proper distance apart with the bar with the piston with the ring sprung out with the plate for the piston rods attached or put in the front of the end of the cylinders. The crossheads are attached with the piston rod. The crossheads with their side blocks act as a guide setting on the slide bars between which the slide block must be worked up and down quite freely without shake. The slide valves are played for the inside of the buckle for the rectangular frame forward solid with the spindle of the path through the glands and the end of the steam chest cover. The buckles and frames simply embrace the valve so that when the spindles are moved the valve gear, the valves move with them. The valves and the buckles are placed in the position inside of the steam chest, the back end of the spindle butt covered to the valve rods with work, and the circular guides forming part of the motion plate with the accuracy of the work must be such that the century line with the spindles guide with each with the side with exactly opposite of it. Frequently, in the case that there is an offset with the century line most perfectly parallel to each of the other, the spindles must be moved freely without the shaking the binding of the guides. Whistle above the being done, but the whistle above the work is being done with the motion of the other rectors may be fitting with the axle blocks into the horn blocks by filing the side faces until they are bear evenly with the horn cheek. The boxes should be fair tightly between the horn block and the box faces, but not so tight that they cannot be moved up and down to allow the vertical movements of the springs. Everything must be perfectly square. The axle blocks on one side exactly in line with those of the other, and otherwise axles would be on the skew with the locomotive would run badly. The horn block faces opposite edge who have then previously been fixed exactly in line, tested across the engine by straight edge of the matching of the boring axle and boxes is done by the accurately modern methods of the century of the axle blocks equal distance from each of the horn block faces. If the work has not been already done with the wheel shop, the axle blocks after it has been removed, the horn blocks are fitted to internals on the axle and to be bed down on the bearings described in Chapter 6. It should be understanding that many of the above operations are carried with the simultaneously different gangings of men, but the purpose of the quick erection as many of the men as possible work together. Same engine under leading of the hand of the chargeman, as in he had termed. The chargeman is responsible for the whole work of the single engine. Frequently may have to do the engine of the hand once he is termed responsible for the shop foreman, the superintendent of the whole work done in the shop in which a dozen 20 engines may be in course for the erection, boiler and smoke box, etc. The engine is now ready for the boiler and plated on the frame of the boiler. Comes in finished condition from the boiler shop with all mounted attached in the lower onto the frames that with the overhead crane. It's at a stage the accuracy of the boiler shop with work is tested finally within firebox has been lowered down into position between the frames. Exact expansion angle irons. K, figure 2, with the mustard square, with the rest evenly on the top edge of the frame, with it at the same time the bottom edge of the flange of the smoke box 2 plate with the front end of the boil barrel must fit accurately. Up on the cylinder, which with it, both of the accuracy of the work is generally such that no alteration is needed, but it does occasionally happen in these respects with the boiler slightly out of truth with a lot of the extra chipping and fitting with the expansion iron rod. Expansion angle iron with the heating of the segment with the 2 plate flange with is required. The smoke box is built with the up in the position made with the thin sheet seals with riveted together. The smoke box 2 plate with the flanges front portion is formed with a large angle iron ring with a plate with which with the smoke door. This door's hole is formed with the rivet is ringed The front of the plates, the side of the bottom of their bolted to the flange of the cylinder. The small box with the quick airtight with the draws the air through the surface of the crevices through the badly fitting door of the boiler will not make steam properly, and any incandescent cylinders drawn from the tube will continue to burn the smoke box, damage to the thin plates. Top of the inside cylinders from the floor of the smoke box covering the fire brickwork with the cement in its place. And cement is placed over them to protect them from corrosion. The blast pipe of the steam pipes in the smoke box are then put into position, jointed up in the cylinder. Steam pipe also has been jointed with a steam pipe, steam tight joint on the T pipe on the smoke box. The blast pipe is accurately with the plumb line with the century of the top position with the coincide with the vertical century of the chimney and otherwise. One side blast would result, which would soon with the wear in the hole of the chimney as the boiler would not steam properly with the fitting of the smoke back door, with which the hinges must be exactly level, strong enough to prevent the door from sagging together with the fixing of the blower and a blower pipe complete with the work in the smoke box. Alright, meanwhile, other men are engaged with the fixing of the boiler clothing in the cab of the splash for the clothing with essential to reduce the radiation lock of the boiler with the materials used with the formerly boards with the yellow pine wood painted fire resistant asbestos paint, new felt sheets, asbestos mattresses, small blocks with the magnesium cuts with the fit with the counter with the boiler generally used. They're secured with the light work framework, angle irons passivated. Strips fastened around with the boiler, finely curved with the thin steel with the planished iron sheet screwed with the framework with the splasher cap side with the bolted with the platform front plate with the casting cab resting upon the top of the firebox per shell. Wheel springs. The engine is not wheeled with the finish of the wheel, but their axles are already coming in from the wheel shop of the running with the rail of the pit over the engine is being built with the remaining of the engine of the pit until the required air axle boxes have been embedded with the journals previously described. The engine lifted in overhead crane and the wheels rolled underneath each of the pair being played within the corresponding horn blocks. The axle is played from the end of the journals, the engine lowered and very slowly and carefully, the man being stationed at each wheel of the guide with the axle box of the space between the horns. The spring of it off to the top of the base with above the axle box have already been put in position side link for the pins in place for that, so that the engine comes down central spring pilers upon the axle box is weight of the engine gradually taken in the springs. The horn keeps are bolted in the position with the spring with the underhung that they have to put in the place after the engine has been lowered onto the wheels. But placing the axles on the convenient level, they're slipping the pins over the links and the spring buckles into respective holes. Motion work. To put the connection rods into the place with the small of the end of the strap, the brasses with the couple of the crossheads over each of the side of each of the big end of the brasses in to put with the crank pin journal with the drive axles. These rods are heavier than large end of the rod made with the rest upon with the timber bulk with the place of the cross of the pit is then lifted out with the 3-man until the butt end of the slips into the open jaw and the strap where it's secured with the out bolt and cotter. The eccentric rod and eccentric strap with a couple of the eccentric sheaves that have already been keyed on the proper angle with the crank and axle with the wheel shop with nothing remaining to be done with the plate with the strap, the rod with the position, couple the ladder and the links to the link of the motion, which are put with the same type of the connected with the valve, spindle with the brackets of the frame, which carry the reversing shaft. They're bolted within the plate temporarily, but are not fixed permanently until the valves have been set. With being the next operation description, which is given in the following chapter. For the moment, this is supposed to the valve that have been set with the coupling rods, then put on the pins of the wheel. These rods are formed the end plates with a similar circular brass with the wild white metal bushes for the brass into the holes of the rod with the hydraulic pressure formerly. Double brass is secured with the cotter was almost similar with the use of the connection rods, where the using of the coupling rod they are now almost obsolete within this country. Therefore, they still have a large extent with the continental American engines to prevent the coupling rod being thrown off the wheels. Washers are placed on the end of the coupling rod pins and secured with the nuts and taper split pins. A miscellaneous work now requires to be done with the complete engine with the firebox are placed with the bearers over the firebox with the ash pan and is bolted with the underneath the firebox. The brake gear is also rigged up with all the attendants lever and cylinder cocks over the levers and sand gear, sand pipes, various steam and water pipe connections to the tender and are then put up with the finally buffer plate with a buffer to draw gear complete with the engine and which is ready for the trial time required for the engine. Time required for the erection of the engine. The time of the take of the erect the engine, ordinary side to side with the 6 wheels, all coupled the mains to be taken in about 45 hours from the time of the frame of the place for the place in position. Large modern engine for the 10-12 wheels will be taken a correspondingly longer time. period mentioned would apply with a well-organized work of which a large number of the standard engines of the wing were being erected together with every of the which would be under the care of the one of the chargemen, and smaller works of the 4 weeks have been taken for the erection. A few instances of very rapid erection has been recorded, but the special preparations were made by work in 1888 in London. Northwestern erected with the standard mineral engine was 25 and a half hours. The work was record was beaten in 1891 with the Great Eastern Works at Stratford. The somewhat similar engine was put together ready for the trial with a phenomenal time, 9 hours 47 minutes, by 44 men and boys. The tender was complete with another gang with the same time, and therefore they were quite exceptional cases. It should be understood that in the well-organized 3 to 4 orders, each of the 4 of the dozen 20 engines of the hand of the same at the time. The first order, in which course of the completion of the erection shop, while the boiler fitting of the machine shop is dealing with the part of the number 2 order of the forging foundry part of the boiler shop, having the hand in the same time forging casting boiler plates. Third order may also have the begun when the pattern template shop in the order number 4. The tender. All the tenders constructed and erected with a separately tender shop that may be conventionally with the considered here that they are 3 frame plate with the same quality of steel as those of the engine, thickness about 7/8 of an inch and slightly less than the engine frame. They are usually 4 frame plates which are marked off with the templates drilled and erected with the necessary cross stays. In similar manner with these locomotive, the wheels, axle blocks, the horn block, spring for the made with a similar manner. Chief difference of the difference between the wheels being with that the wheels be smaller, do not require the wheel lafts and such of a large faceplate. With the wheels are similar pressed onto the axle and the hydraulic press are not secured with a key for the couple of wheels over the locomotive. The tank is separate structure which is placed upon the fastening of the frame. The frame plate with about 1/4 inch thickness for the side, 3 3/8 of an inch, and for the bottom of the mouth seal with the quality of the not specifically high grade, which is required for off-drilled and punching the plates riveted together with the angle iron supporting stay with 1/2 inch rivets of space and about 1 3/4 inch centers. Tank of the bolt with the angle iron, which runs around the top of the engine frame, with it can be lifted for the readily examination when required. In erecting the brake of the gear with the bolt of the engine and the tender scare must be taken with the bear. The brake of the blocks do not rub against the tires when the brake is off or off. Otherwise, considerable heating of the underdo. The wear of the curve of the blocks are arranged to adjust the clear of the wheels at the top of the sides, about 1/4 inch clear at the bottom. Of the reason for this is the brake pull rods are below the blocks, while Willis, the fulcrum to which the brake block hangers are attached to are above, therefore the bottom side of the blocks move through the greatest distance where the brakes are applied. Chapter 9. Setting the valves.